Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today we are going to talk about working your soil, or at least knowing when you should start working your soil, whether you're just breaking it up so that you are going to plant something or whether you are actually planting something in it. Because it is really, really easy to dig in the soil and to start planting or to start working with your soil and getting it prepared for planting before the soil itself is ready. You can absolutely destroy a soil structure by working it when it is either too wet or too dry. All right, it is a very bad idea to muck with your soil when it's not at the right moisture level, basically. So what you want to do is you want to test the soil by grabbing it in your hands. Okay, you don't need a meter or any kind of diagnostic or anything to figure out whether or not your soil is workable. You're just going to take a big handful and squeeze it in your hand. Squeeze it really hard. Then let go. If it crumbles into a powder, it's too dry. If you open your hand and it just looks like dirt, dry dirt, it is way too dry to work. You're going to want to water it and then let it sit a day or two. So water it well for a couple of days and then check again. If when you squeeze that soil, it forms this wet, tight ball, then it's actually too wet. Okay? What should happen when you squeeze that soil, there should be moisture to it and it should stick to itself. But when you give it a couple of taps with your finger, it should kind of collapse. It shouldn't like sucker onto itself and form this dense ball. A dense ball is too wet to work with. But plain dirt is also not good because if it's dry dirt, you can't actually plant anything in it. If you plant in dirt that is too dry, either your seeds won't germinate or your seedlings have nowhere to go. Even if you water right after, the soil needs to have some moisture before you plant. The opposite is also true if it's too wet. If it's too wet, your seeds or your seedlings will just start to rot instead of sprout and grow the way they're supposed to. So you need to make sure your soil is at the correct moisture level. Again, just do that with your hands. Okay? So when you water it or let it dry out, you do want to go a couple of times a day and kind of just rake through the soil a little bit with your little hand rake, with just gently. You don't want to destroy the soil structure, just to see if it's kind of getting to where it needs to be. All right. So if you start raking it through and you're like, okay, it's holding moisture better, it's almost ready, then you wet it down again and you wait till tomorrow. Or if you're waiting for it to dry out, you can cover it and just cover it almost with those little kind of greenhouse things, but leave ventilation open just to keep the rain off your soil. If it's not raining, you don't have to do that. You can just leave it out to dry, but still kind of rake through it gently just to see if it is doing what it's supposed to do. Is it drying out or is it retaining moisture the way it's supposed to, so you'll be able to work with it. So you're also going to use this process to discover if there's just not enough drainage. If your soil is not drying out, you're going to have to figure out a way to kind of drain it, dry it out a little bit better, because if it hasn't been raining and your soil is still damp, what's going to happen is your seeds just will never grow. They'll just rot. You're going to get root rot in all your plants because it's holding too much moisture. So figure out where that moisture is coming from and see if you can't resolve the issue. Remember that your best tools for digging around in your new garden bed are your small hand trowel and your small hand rakes, things like that, your hand cultivators. You do want things that are fairly small so that you can work in small groups. Unless you're doing really large gardens, you do want to use smaller tools to allow you to gently check that soil. You don't want to just start ripping the soil apart and possibly damaging its structure. So be careful. You do want to make sure that your soil is ready to be worked. So again, squeeze a handful of soil. If it's too dry, you're going to see that right away. Soil that won't hold together at all is too dry to work with. Wet it down, keep going. Soil that holds together when squeezed, but doesn't release when you tap it, so it just kind of stays in one big clump, it's too wet to work with. Ideally, what you want is soil that holds together when squeezed, but crumbles apart when tapped. So it's holding some moisture, but not so much moisture that nothing will grow. This is really important because if you plant too early, plant before that soil is ready, you're just going to have a lot of failure. It's really tempting to just throw seeds in the ground and see what happens, and you can do that. But if you do that, you are risking nothing growing, and it's really disappointing when you plant either a bunch of seedlings or a bunch of seeds directly in the ground and nothing comes up. It all just dies. And we've all done it. I've done it. I've planted in soil that was way too wet to work, and everything just kind of died because it was just too saturated. So do take a little bit of time to check to make sure your soil is the proper moisture levels. You don't need any tools to do that. You can just check with your hands, but just double check before you start throwing seeds in the ground. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.